Hello, everybody. Well, first on. I'm going to be talking for about 15 minutes on current research that I've been conducting around virtual reality, augmented reality, and particularly in my last two books around digital spaces, spatial temporal transformations, to use the fancy term, but trying to sort of render some thought processes around how do we need to think about designing enterprise scale virtual reality and augmented reality business strategies. The second thing I'll do is talk about an example. I'm currently a consultant and lead a digital energy consultancy, and I'll talk about particularly around digital assets and how we're thinking about smart energy and how virtual reality and augmented reality can help there. And then finally, I'll just sort of give you some final thoughts around where this is all going and why the digital economy will be underpinned by not only smart cities. I think the battleground will be in the virtual and augmented spaces, not in the physicality of the smart city. What I think will happen in various other horizontalizations of sectors will be driven by this technology. So, my first sort of piece I was really going to say was these two guys are kind of sort of, that plus Pokemon Go are kind of the poster children of VR and Oculus Rift and various other technologies. They're really kind of vying for this space. This is obviously the consumer space around natural language processing. I haven't used the Google product myself, but I've certainly used a year in advance the Echo Alexa product. And the question you have to ask yourself underneath this, I asked a colleague at my previous consultancy, well, what do you think of Amazon Echo and Alexa? What is it? Well, he said it's not actually the product that's actually the issue. If you actually have a look at what's all around these things, it's the ecosystem behind them. It is effectively a virtual supply chain driven by voice. And I've actually argued that perhaps this is the first step of the removal of the keyboard and mouse. We're moving into that era of natural language interaction. The response I've had back on the social media is saying, oh, no. Andrew Ning says 95% to 97% is then a game changer. This, I think, is a slight game changer moving forward. But I think what's happening here is they represent the tip of the iceberg in terms of where enterprises need to think about these kind of technologies. And really it's what I call the battle for digital spaces, the battle for land grab, digital land grab. So really in terms of my piece was really thinking about automation. I'd like to talk about soft and hard AI. Obviously hard AI is, in the classical senses, very difficult, but emulating human consciousness, which is a whole other subject, which is for another conference and another event. But what I'm talking about is really the automation continuum around the use of soft algorithmic kind of automation versus actuators. I noticed yesterday there was another event, which I would have liked to have gone to, the UAV World Conference, which I'm not promoting that one instead of this event. But the idea of using robotics and automation as a kind of hard implementation of algorithms. I think really the dimensions I'm talking about here is really thinking about automation. You have to think about the human-machine interface, the capabilities that the agency that creates. And then down in, as I said, your left side is really the what I call the virtual to physical interaction. What can I get in my physical space from the virtual world? And then on the right side is really what I call the physical to virtual transformation capabilities. How can I actually take my physical world and what I call multiplicity, live multiple lives within that context. Contextualization of data is not just about the physical micro-location, but we can actually replicate and do other things in the virtual space at a point in time. A couple of sort of basic, back to academic theory slightly, in terms of human-machine, machine-machine, human-to-machine interfaces, or machine-to-machine and human-to-human, is really the numbers are speaking for themselves. When we talk about big data as the new oil, I think Imperial College talk about that, but certainly the idea of usage data is really the new oil, I would argue, is really where we're at. One thing that I find quite shocking, which I think is something I don't see written in the blog sphere or spoken about by various analysts with respect to Open, which is certainly one of the leading consultants in this area, is this idea that what does it actually do? It's not only leave you a signature, a digital smoke pipe of your activity in your home or in your work, but actually by the patterns and characteristics, by the algorithmic analysis of those, using GPU rather than CPU technology now, which is at a price point that makes it cost effective, you can start to determine inferences. I mean, I like something that happened recently. I think the MIT labs over in America have said they've got a device now that can take the Wi-Fi signal bouncing off your chest and actually detect and calculate what your heart rate is and your perspiration, your breathing rate. And from that deduce not only your behavior and your emotional state, but actually start to influence your feedback system based on your emotional state, all passively interacting, which I find quite scary, frankly. So the issue around this is really understanding not only the nature of data, but actually the characteristics of this. And this is something I'm trying to get my head around. This is only the third book I'm writing at the moment, which is called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, promoted by the World Economic Forum. But this idea really is we're moving from a consumer IoT and industrial IoT converging into AI-driven business strategy. And the question around this is really, where is virtualization or virtuality and augmentation moving into this space? So really, the first kind of thing that we start to think about, if I were advising or looking at business strategies, we talk about joined up business and the idea of doing vertical integration as well as horizontal integration. But what's happening now is we're starting to get these value ecosystems, which are two-sided marketplaces and multi-sided marketplaces from various academic research, the sharing economy, the Uberization effect, which are all driven by platform strategies. But then we think about what is the content actually doing behind this, joining up these spaces. So point one is really around how do I start to interact and design this kind of ecosystem of content on not only a physical level, but on a virtual level. So back to, again, some basic 101s. The way of reimagining your spaces in your business, your enterprise, you have to break it down into what I would argue physical and virtual building blocks. What is the narrative? What is the Class A artifacts of that is probably around the physical space, the transit space. A colleague of mine, I think, was very interesting. He actually said, well, when you're in a car, you can take your office with you. I said, yeah, you can do your sort of emails and stuff. No. You can actually take the physicality experience of that in a virtual augmented world inside the car while you're actually being driven by the automated car. So this mindset changes. You have to start thinking in a very different way about physical and virtual spaces in this world. And finally, I'd like to talk about the human body as a set of subsystems, obviously. And effectively, if you start to unpack what that actually physically means, then it becomes almost like Star Trek, science fiction, when you can think about some of the augmentation and wearables of the future. We just saw the start of this. So I like this diagram particularly. Modular nested architectures is the way to think about thinking about your VR and AR strategy in your enterprise. What is modularity? Well, it helps you reduce maintenance costs, helps you increase agility, what I call an oxymoron, structural agility is the phrase I like using at the moment. What do you mean by structural? Yeah, it's controlled, but it's also agile at the same time. And this idea is you can start to get nested systems within systems. This is an old concept. I think it originated in the Department of Defense in America, SOSI, System of Systems Integration. And you need to start designing different spaces and joining these up. And guess what? This conference is about that. So we need to think about the materiality of our existence and how we use different dimensions of our experience, both in spatial and object interaction, as well as location and manipulation of those things. I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and bounce through this. And then a slide that quite a lot of my students quite like is this idea of thinking about spaces in terms of how they can be transformed. So I've got information about a particular object. If that's a physical object, could I generate a virtual object in 3D printing, for example? Well, I've got a digital object, and I then want to convert it into a physical object. How do I do that? And so there's all this kind of toing and froing of new types of technology innovation that you've got in your innovation labs. But the thing is, how do you actually start to manipulate that in your business strategy? So, in a nutshell, what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this with a lot of commentators, particularly analysts as well, talking about this joined up sort of three areas, really. First of all, there's on this side here is really the interaction system, which could be the device or agency, the device you're using to interact with this service. You then have the kind of multi-channel contextualization, which is where you're seeing AI starting to be integrated with the virtual reality and augmented reality. And then behind this is really how do I create the ecosystem platform, or how do I instrument the environment to actually interact with the services? So it goes from device, service layer to environment layer. You have to start engineering that in a different way with virtual reality and augmented reality. So just a couple more minutes to run then. Here's just an example that we've been doing at Ensign Global. And what we're doing here is really thinking about the smart meter home. All of the different signature data that's coming off your appliances, you can start to analyze that data passively and starting to think of ways in which you can do assisted living style augmentation, which could be an Alexa or a Google Home coming back with a kind of advice. Patronize me today. Say I've been a good boy and I've been managing my energy footprint well, or whatever. It's all part of this experience. It's a multi-valency, multi-channel type of experience, voice, sound, interaction. One of my most favorite interviews I did for my second book was a digital producer for an arts theatre, and he said, it's a bit like thinking about Industrial Light and Magic meets the Enterprise. When this stuff bangs together, it makes sparks if you get it right. You can really, not only you create sticky and sort of serious gaming, but you can actually start to really, almost like choreograph performances with your audience, your customer. So here, what we can do here is you can start, the only point I want to pull out here is you've got another layer coming in. You've got the data acquisition, the communications, you've got the real-time analytics and machine learning aspects, but then you've got the visualization process. What's new about this, going from two-tier, three-tier architectures, you've now got a multi-tier architecture. In the enterprise, you have these two new emerging architectural layers called the what I call the machine learning layer, the AI layer that creates all the intelligence behind the augmented reality. And then the way that it's then visualized is the two layers you need to start designing in your enterprise architecture strategy. So I've just got one more minute. So just to wrap up then, this is a really important slide and I haven't got enough time to explain to it, but if you can read it at your leisure, this is what I think is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years around the way the digital economy is going to evolve. We're going to get new types of ecosystem clusters. We're going to get sort of adjacent cross-horizontal service integration. And we're also going to get new types of energy and services. And finally, my last slide is all about precision. The experience that you can create. I think I just noticed a person we were speaking to yesterday. It's about generativity of the experience with the user, either through learning or interaction. And you're getting a much more higher precision, faster, much more relevant experience with this technology. So hopefully I've been interesting, triggered a few thoughts, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow, Mark, you really did cover a lot of ground there. I look at a lot of these spaces, but not usually in a joined-up way. So that's really interesting that you're bringing the IoT, you're bringing the AR, the VR, you're bringing virtual assistants together. I always come at this from a market focus. If there were one company that seems to be further down the road of this, bringing those things together, who would you say it is?
Well, I would say it's probably two companies I would answer. One would be certainly Amazon.
Right. Is
one that I like from the consumer side in terms of Alexa. I think they've got the supply chain integration, which is the interesting part to watch. And then I've got a startup company I actually like, which is called Luminous. Which I saw recently. This is a startup company, but they're using 360 laser capture to capture the environment, say digital surveying or digital architecture. What's interesting, they're using the Unreal Engine and other technologies to create a virtual digital twin of the building or the engineering device or the oil rig. And I think this is the generation of people now, today, where we've got to start thinking about digital twinning. And I would say that's just a very good example. Check them out. Really good. Luminosity.
Okay, great. So,
thank you.
Any quick questions from the audience for Mark? You almost stunned me into silence, Mark, to be honest. So thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thank you.